So how can you govern and control personal data effectively and, importantly, securely? We'd like to have a conversation with you around data privacy and its associated challenges to better equip you to tackle this challenge. So I'd encourage you to please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will come back and answer any questions posed by you, the audience, at the end of this session. So I'd like to start straight away by introducing you to Onkar, who will explain the recent challenges around data governance and privacy. Over to you, Onkar.
Thank you so much, Andy, and really it's a pleasure to speak on this topic today. While data governance and privacy, particularly while working in distributed environments, is not really a new concept, governance of data becomes even more imperative in the modern digital age. And with great data comes great responsibility. And I really see three main reasons why this is happening today. Firstly, the data environment in an organization can be increasingly complex to govern. The volumes and the types of data being used by organizations for analysis, along with the technologies used to harness this data, has been increasing exponentially. Now think about all the data from outside the organization, from social media, web clickstream data, and third-party data sources that provide tremendous value to an organization, but contain lots of personal identifiable information that can be misused if not governed correctly. Organizations are increasingly looking to use real-time data to generate instantaneous insights. This data can percolate through the data systems very quickly and can be a challenge to trace and govern if not done correctly. When you combine this with the heavily distributed nature of computing environments today, with data residing across multiple technology platforms and locations, it makes for a highly challenging data environment to manage, which means that a static, application-based governance approach does not work anymore. And as we look to break down silos of data, there is increased risk, particularly at the boundaries of computing and storage platforms, which needs continuous adaptive governance mechanisms that scale with the data. Secondly, people who have access to data in the organization and the way it is used has changed and continues to change rapidly today. As organizations look to be increasingly data-driven and democratize their data assets, new data handling roles like data stewards, data scientists, data storytellers are coming up. And not just that, we have traditional line of business users who were once passive data consumers and are now looking to increasingly be active data explorers, and they are increasingly demanding more and more access to additional data. Additionally, the ways in which all these users use the data is evolving very quickly as well. And as organizations look to mine data as a core strategic asset, the purpose for which a specific data entity is used can change rapidly with time. Data which is apparently noise for one group and seldom used is often gold dust for another group in the same company, and this classification can change rapidly as well. If you think about modern development approaches like DevOps, for instance, or crowdsourced data science, these need seamless and continuous handling of data across multiple environments with varying levels of governance requirements, which creates a need to relook at governance and privacy at the design level itself and not just as an afterthought. Today, data is a means of competitive differentiation, a core enterprise asset which is expected to drive use cases around customer experience, hyper-personalization, and the use of autonomous interactive systems. Now, all these need the collection, storage, and processing of personal data. And as organizations look to get more and more closer to their consumers, the level of risk of privacy breach goes up. And really balancing this divide between maintaining tight controls on who accesses the data and at what levels, and at the same time ensuring that everyone has ready access to as much data as they need can be a real challenge in the modern world. And lastly, the risk and compliance environment has really evolved significantly in the last 5 years or so, which has placed additional demands on enterprises that have not been experienced so far. Think about all the regulations that require you to maintain a detailed audit of who has accessed every single data element, and possibly being able to delete every single trace of that data element throughout the enterprise very quickly. How do you maintain a traceability of data across the distributed applications and user groups, across on-premise and cloud environments, is a question that all enterprises are grappling with today. Data protection regulations such as the GDPR here in Europe and HIPAA in North America mandate enterprises to ensure that the data is secure, traceable, and stored and deleted as required. And the cost of non-compliance can be huge. And really, this challenge is pervasive across the world, with as many as 107 countries having data protection and privacy legislations in place. But I think more importantly, governance and privacy isn't just a compliance issue. It has become a business imperative today. Cyber insurance companies take your data governance and privacy postures into account when they do their actual processes and calculate the risk and premium assessments, which means companies without adequate governance mechanisms are likely to pay higher premiums. And the costs of data breach can go far beyond compliance fines, with business reputation and customer trust at stake in the modern world. I think now that we have seen some of the reasons for why data governance and privacy has assumed greater importance in today's world, let us hear from Darren on his perspective on some of the challenges and how to navigate them. Over to you, Darren.
Thanks so much, Onkar. So some really interesting food for thought there. Although news on privacy has been a little quieter during the pandemic crisis, the topic is still relevant and complex. And here are two really very real examples. British Airways were fined £20 million in October for unnecessary exposure of personal data. This specific use case relates to cross-border data transfers, where we see the emergence of the principle of data sovereignty, where complexity and pitfalls are all too common. Think about TikTok's recent activity in the US. Think about the decisions of the EU court to invalidate existing principles for personal data transfers between the EU and the US, and the potential complexity of post-Brexit UK data strategies being actioned. In addition, in March 2020, the Marriott Hotel Group suffered a huge data breach, which compromised the records of 5.2 million hotel guests. Hackers were able to siphon off data of millions of these guests by hacking user credentials belonging to just 2 members of Marriott staff. This attack highlights the importance of company employees using multi-factor authentication and the potentially huge penalties for failing to do so. On top of all of this, we have new privacy regulation opening for class actions, allowing customers to sue their suppliers who fail to protect their data as well, like in the recent case of EasyJet. The stakes of data privacy are getting higher and higher, and as the pandemic drives organizations to accelerate their transformation, hence moving customer relationships into digital channels and to the cloud, we will see this trend accelerating. But in parallel, the regulatory scene has not stood still either. Regulators such as governments, states, and national entities have all stepped in to start regulating the data market and protect citizens' data privacy. By doing so, they've definitely added extra layers of complexity to the challenge, and the number of regulations is just multiplying. Gartner predicts that by 2023, 65% of the world's population will have its personal data covered under modern privacy regulations, up from just 10% last year. The EU was first regarded as leading the pack in this matter with the introduction of GDPR 2 years ago, but since then things have become more complex and more fragmented. In the Americas, we have HIPAA, CCPA, LGPD, and others. In Asia Pacific, individual countries are introducing their own privacy acts. In more than 130 countries today have put legislation in place to secure the protection and data of privacy of their citizens' data. Most of these regulations control not only the processing of data, but also cross-border transfers of the data. For example, storing or accessing personal data about a Japanese resident from the US, for example, is restricted under the Japan Act of Protection of Personal Information. So to build the scope of your privacy program, it's important to clearly understand what data you have, about whom, where do you store it, and from which location will it be accessed. Knowing this type of detail will help you understand what your privacy obligations really are. Unfortunately, the road to data protection and control is longer than expected for most and continues to face operational challenges. Talend conducted a study which shows that less than half of European companies were able to respond to requests for access to their customers' personal data within the SLA stated as part of the GDPR regulation. And in fact, our benchmark was very basic. We simply asked for our personal data from more than 100 companies across Europe of all sizes and sectors, as the law allows us. Yet 98% of these 100 companies have a GDPR charter accessible on their website, which explains their GDPR policy and how to submit access requests. So this indicates a degree of maturity in these companies that have a GDPR project in the pipeline or probably have already assigned DPO and other staff. But they don't deliver on their engagement, and this is an operational problem. When, as a customer, one follows the procedure indicated by the Charter, only 42% of the companies responded correctly within the legal deadline of 30 days. This is slightly better than the 30% we found in our previous study back in 2018 at the beginning of the GDPR compliance, but it's still very low. And even those who responded on time are far from perfection. It takes them on average of 16 days to meet a demand, which from the customer's point of view in a digital age is a decade. What this experience shows is that most companies do not yet have the process or information systems to meet the GDPR mandate. And it costs them dearly. According to Gartner, manual processing of things that seem simple, such as an access request, cost on average of $1,300 per query. This is clearly not a scalable cost. So why is achieving a successful data privacy solution so hard? There are a number of foundational challenges that can compound to hamper the ability to embrace data privacy initiatives. Firstly, there's still a lot of manual, low-value activity that goes on behind the scenes to help organizations manage their data and associated governance processes. Many organizations are unable to drive automation in this part of the business, often due to incumbent complexity or a lack of maturity or priority, or both. Whatever the reason, these costly, long-duration manual procedures are unsuitable for a digital presence and hamper the agility of the organization to embrace the change needed. Secondly, there's a lack of reliability or trust in the ability to continuously monitor, detect, and address instances of personal data throughout the organization. As organizations strive to become more data-driven, data acquisition and personalization are key initiatives to support longer-term goals. They must have processes and supporting automation in place to reduce the burden of personal data detection and governance, to release resources from lengthy manual processes, and hence scale the data privacy operation. And finally, we often see that data privacy initiatives are not embraced from a customer-centric point of view. That means that some organizations attempt to solve the challenge from an inward-looking, internalized perspective, often missing the context of why this is needed and what problem data privacy is looking to solve. If not careful, there can be a mismatch in developed capabilities and use cases required from a customer or consumer perspective. So it can seem that achieving data privacy is a long uphill battle, but businesses that bet on data privacy and data governance can also reap tremendous rewards. Avoiding fines and data breaches is crucial, but might be seen more of a defensive posture, shall we say. Avoiding being fined by knowing what data you have, its provenance, and its location is a mandatory baseline, but perhaps not quite seizing on the opportunity that good data privacy practices can provide. The offensive posture is to leverage and augment this baseline to explore the opportunity that good data privacy practices can unlock, such as hyper-personalization strategies, increasing marketing return on investment, and hence build long-lasting relationships. As Andy said, McKinsey states that personalization, which requires better targeting and segmentation of your data, can deliver 5 to 8 times ROI on marketing spend. The ROI of a clean and compliant database is also evident. A Direct Marketing Association survey shows the concrete 17% ROI that European marketeers get from GDPR in their marketing campaigns. Okay, they have less contacts in the database due to opt-outs, but the contact data for remaining contacts are in better shape, so campaign targeted improvements while returning better rates as opt-in customers show more engagement than those who receive unsolicited emails. Finally, safe, personalized engagement can help drive lasting customer relationships. InfoSecurity magazine states that over 1/5 of US consumers will never return to a brand that has suffered a data breach. On the contrary, when done right, data privacy and governance is a fantastic opportunity for companies to redeem themselves towards their customers. You can truly build trusted relationships with your employees, business partners, users, and customers alike, and make it a differentiator versus the competition. So what approach should be implemented to help to deliver a more offensive data privacy posture? In the following slides, we'll cover a step-by-step approach to help guide you through this challenge. Talend supports a simple three-phase approach to allow you to regain control of your personal data. The approach relies on our underlying data fabric platform that allows you to automate the capture of all your data assets, introspect them for personal data, and classify accordingly. The approach does not require you to copy your personal data into a central location or store either. You can, however, choose to take this approach, for example, via a data lake, but it's your choice of data architecture. The journey really starts with a data discovery and documentation step. It would allow you to create your personal data terminology and classification model based on business term definition. Talend then maps this terminology onto your actual data through semantic linkages. You can then appoint stewards to be in charge of each of the personal data assets, set up the base control rules, and so on. This step is essentially conducted in our underlying data catalog capabilities. The second step is to reconcile the data to support various governance processes and ensure that it is shared with those who are entitled. For example, to fulfill a customer's data access request, you'll have to access all the systems that they're likely to have their personal data stored in related to the individual, retrieve all those data components, reconcile them, and finally share them as part of a secure customer interaction. This step relies mainly on leveraging data lineage and privacy policies from the underlying data catalog in conjunction with data integration and data quality for data processing, and also on APIs when it comes to making this data accessible in real-time applications or consumers. For example, exposing requested data via a personal data portal accessible by the customer in their own self-service mode. The third step is to safely democratize data through operationalization of data protection policy and processes. Now that stewards have control over personal data, they want to leverage it. For example, they will want to ensure that sensitive data is systematically hidden as soon as it goes outside the originally defined scope of use. This is called data minimization within GDPR. To operationalize with confidence and scale, the solution must maintain privacy rules and apply them automatically where appropriate. For example, when a customer asks to practice their right to be forgotten, the data must be anonymized and deleted throughout the entire chain. So let's just take a quick look at each step in a little more detail. To help automate your data inventory, you should firstly define your critical business terms within a glossary and associated classifications or taxonomies. For example, an email address might be a term classified as PII, whereas a city of residence may be seen as non-sensitive data. Secondly, you should look to automate your smart data mapping by automatically harvesting metadata from systems to ensure scale and accuracy, whilst mapping semantic sampling of the underlying data onto your business terms and taxonomies. By automatically combining data lineage with semantic mapping to your terms and classifications, you not only take control of your known data, but also help capture the unknown. For example, when someone decides to replicate data from a production system to a test system or to a data lake without prior notice. And lastly, establish a single source of trust by creating a single point of management and publication across all personal data that behaves not only as an automated monitoring system to track and trace personal data wherever it resides or is processed, but also acts as an active agent that empowers stakeholders to take control of a personal data wherever needed. To protect and anonymize your data, you should firstly configure and maintain your data protection policies. A data protection policy is a set of documented guidelines for ensuring that data assets are managed consistently and used properly based on a number of factors, such as a user's role, privacy access, and so on. A modern data platform should not only provide a repository to register these policies as part of a data catalog, but also make them actionable by making sure the policies are enforced across the data landscape. The system should also provide an audit trail to demonstrate compliance to third-party auditors and regulators. Secondly, you should enable track and trace through data lineage. Most data privacy regulations require organizations to know precisely where data is located, especially when it comes to managing regulatory processes such as right to be forgotten or controlling data transfers, which may impact data jurisdiction or sovereignty policies. Therefore, data governance teams need to make their data processing pipelines auditable as part of the lineage chain. And finally, pseudonymize, I have trouble saying that, and anonymize. In data privacy regulations, data protection principles aren't regulated when they apply to anonymous information. That is, information that does not relate to an individual or identifiable person. This means that data anonymization, whenever applicable, is the simplest way to minimize risk and meet compliance standards. Once used only by IT and security specialists, data masking or privacy techniques now need to be democratized and made available as part of a tool set for any data expert or data citizen, so they can confidently share their data, even if it contains personal information. And the last phase of the process, streamlining your data subject access requests, is really the generalization of operationalization of your data privacy processes. It starts with defining and establishing your data pipelines, which orchestrate and control data movement within or indeed outside the organization. You have no way to know where your data is, or indeed have a complete view of lineage until you can track and trace data movement. This is the prerequisite to establishing internal controls and to addressing cross-border data transfers, which require agility for data location and data usage cases. Next, we look to publish or operationalize trusted data via APIs. For data consumers across lines of business, privacy must be established by design as something that is straightforward and convenient to comply with, rather than a constraint that they have to consider and establish before doing anything with the data. Delivering data as a service provides the ability to wrap or encapsulate existing and new data assets with a consistent approach to data security, protection, and privacy mechanisms from the get-go, providing a privacy by design approach to liberating data for safe use. It's a win-win solution that unlocks data while enforcing security and privacy controls. And finally, we look to deliver data safely through self-service channels. At most companies, customers who wish to exercise their rights for data access, portability, rectification, or deletion initiate a truly tedious process that requires IT involvement. A better approach is to establish a managed customer service with automatic data collection, fulfillment workflows, and convenient user experience to address the topic, because privacy is more than just a legal mandate. It's a contract of trust that your customers expect from you. To help put some of these concepts we've discussed in this three-step plan into perspective, let's look at a demonstration scenario that illustrates many of these principles. Let's take a look at an effective data privacy strategy in practice through our Acme Retail data privacy demonstration. Acme Retail has accelerated its digital transformation strategy, looking to offer a personalized shopping experience across multiple channels. They do this by knowing and respecting their customers' personal data, but use it to profile, segment, and target a highly tailored shopping experience. Let's take a deeper look into the challenges of meeting and implementing such a data privacy strategy. Acme are trying to balance a number of business challenges, from the baseline of safely and securely managing all customer data to efficiently supporting regulatory requirements and yet helping to safely democratize data access to data consumers within Acme itself. For Janet, our CDO, her first priority is regulatory compliance through good data security and privacy practices. Her other goals include reducing cost to serve data, both internally and externally, whilst always protecting any sensitive data. For Chris, our data engineer, on the other hand, he has to implement practices and capabilities to support Janet's goals. He looks to ensure an automated yet secure data processing platform, delegating ownership and management of key privacy policy elements to subject matter experts where appropriate, and provide the framework for all compliance capabilities, such as the right to be forgotten. Their goals are, however, hampered by a number of key challenges or pains that threaten their ability to deliver on these goals, such as a lack of centralized control or policy for sensitive data, and the risk of shadow IT projects emerging if a fast, efficient service isn't delivered. Fortunately, Acme just purchased Talend Data Fabric to power their data privacy platform. So let's take a deeper look into how they will achieve these goals. The Acme system and data environment is pretty typical of a retailer having gone through digital transformation. They have a number of source systems, both modern and legacy, running the business with distributed and often fragmented customer data. Acme's data privacy data lake follows a typical land and ingest, process and transform, followed by a publishing of data architecture, with the lake being used as a source for reporting, analytics, and research alike. What is different in Acme Retail, however, is their use of a data catalog to harvest and maintain technical metadata whilst managing semantic relationships to business terms and their associated privacy policies at all times. This is the foundation of Acme Retail's data privacy platform, which seamlessly integrates and harmonizes with their data management needs. Let's take a look into Janet and Chris's needs in more detail in the form of a demonstration. Firstly, let's take a look at the base scenario. Like other organizations, as we've mentioned, Acme has a series of external systems which they land and ingest data from, including systems like Salesforce that you see here, which contains our contact information. The contact information has personal information such as phone numbers and addresses, as well as other attributes. And whether this data is being ingested from Snowflake or indeed landed into core data warehousing platforms like Snowflake that you see here, all of the personal attributes are littered across the environment. So when you understand where this data exists, it's really easy to understand where your personal data might reside, and therefore easy to figure out how to protect it and to manage it. But what happens if you don't have that vision and don't have that expertise? Wouldn't it be good if we could introduce some sort of system of record for all of our data assets and the relationships they have between them? Let me introduce you to Talend Data Catalog. Talend Data Catalog provides a way of collating all of the underlying technical metadata in the platform, as well as the business semantics of how that information is used. Let's just take a look at the enterprise architecture of the Acme Retail demonstration that's automatically created from the catalog based on understanding of relationships between systems and information flows. What we see on the left-hand side here are our data sources. We're using Talend for our core transformation processing and landing our data into a central data lake. So, for example, if I want to search for a particular table or whatever in the lake here, maybe I can use the faceted drop-down search within the actual data catalog to look for a particular attribute or a particular asset. Here I can see my table, Gel Contact Company. If I drill into this, what we start to see is a view of the technical schematic of what this data represents. I can drill through into the actual schema of the data itself, but more importantly, I can actually look at the data flow associated with this resource. And because we understand the technical metadata and the lineage or relationships between that technical metadata in the catalog, we can start to understand the relationships between the various source systems that you see on the left-hand side here and the role of Snowflake in this particular example as our landing zone and as our data privacy data lake. If I just expand the view of this to maybe a table level or indeed down to a column level, you can start to better understand the relationships between how this data and the technical metadata is related. So, for example, if I highlight the attribute telephone number here in our target data privacy lake, we can see from a lineage point of view that that particular attribute comes from Salesforce as a source. If, however, I look at something a little bit more complex, let me just highlight the path here. What we can see is that the name attribute that we use in our data privacy data lake is in fact potentially resourced from either our MS SQL source or indeed our Salesforce source. And down on the bottom here, we can even see the rule or relationship between how that decision is made. And we can see that there's a preference given to Salesforce. And if that particular value doesn't exist, then we'll retrofit with the name element from the SQL source. So the point of this is that we can show complex lineage within things like a data catalog and understand the provenance and lineage of data. But the challenge is that it's okay as long as you know what you're looking for. What if we could add a business context to the technical metadata and lineage? So let me introduce you to the business glossary concept within Talend Data Catalog. Here we have the ability to define and add terms to a catalog. And here, if I drill through the classifications, I have a bunch of different terms here that are identified as private data terms. Okay, so just take a look at one of those, for example. Here we can see the business definition of first name. We can see that this has got a, given a full description, and we can refer to that at any particular time. There's a full governance workflow for the introduction, the definition, and the certification of these terms to ensure that this information is maintained and accurate at all times. But on top of the individual attributes, we can also add classifications to our business terms, such as a data domain, a business domain, or indeed, in this particular case, a personally identified information domain. And within here, we're also defining the classification concept, but now we can actually start to show the semantic flow of how our personal data terms are related to our technical metadata. And we do that in Talend by looking at the semantic relationships between the glossary and the business terms and the technical metadata that is also harvested within the underlying catalog. And if we, let me just make that a little bigger for you. If we take a look at more detail into this particular view, what we now see is a cut down version of our overall data estate that's in scope here, but only filtered based on where personal information flows. So here we can see the definition of the classification, PII, the business terms that sit in that classification, and also where these classifications are being used throughout our data landscape. Here we can see classifications such as, I don't know, last name being linked to last name here in the landed table, and ultimately in the derived information, the reporting that flows off here into a series of Power BI reports by the looks of things. So the point of this is that we can actually, by this association, start driving the navigation of where personalized terms and personalized information is held within our system, and provide full traceability between the definitions of those terms and the technical metadata that we maintain. Okay, so now we understand those relationships. What about the policies associated with these business terms and the classifications associated with them? So if I effectively go back into my definition of a first name here, for example, what you can see on the right-hand side is essentially what we call an anonymization or a data privacy policy. So every business term might be associated with an anonymization policy if it's deemed to be of personal identifiable information. And if I just open this list here, what you can see is that for this particular implementation, there are a number of anonymization or privacy policies that can be applied to the attribute level. And so as a subject matter expert, as the CDO, or maybe somebody else in data governance or data protection, I can specify the type of policy that I want to apply to this particular attribute, this business domain attribute, as the data is transferred and progressed through our platform. So whenever this data is transmitted, perhaps between production and non-production environments, or moving out of our data jurisdiction or data sovereignty zone, we might apply a privacy policy like this. So in this case, the first name is applying a policy of replacing all letters. But if I look at something like, I don't know, the phone number, we can see here there's a different anonymization or privacy policy applied, which is in effect masking the phone number, i.e., providing a semantically compliant way of masking, but not changing the format of the underlying data item. So let's just leave the CDO view of engaging with the Talend data catalog and the solution for this moment, and look more towards now the data engineering resource of Chris. Within all organizations, there are typically production and non-production data environments. Typically, production contains data in the clear, because that's what we might use for live analytics reporting or engagement with customers themselves. But there's also the need for non-production versions of that data for analytics and research, i.e. not putting private information in the hands of people who don't need to see it or don't need to interact with it. So very often between production and development environments, there's the need to implement various data masking or data privacy policies. So as a result of the configuration that we've set up in the underlying infrastructure in the catalog, between the business terminology, the policies for privatization, and the relationships of those private terms and the technical metadata we understand the traceability of all of those items. And therefore, we're able to implement policies that automatically can deal with privacy or masking of data as they move between different environments. And this is illustrated here. This is a view of our production data, just represented in a simple form. But if I move to the dev version of this data, what you can see is that the privacy policy is applying, all of the policies where appropriate to the business terms and attributes to the development version of the data. So here we can see name, first name, email, and other attributes actually masked as part of this particular example. If I move back to the prod view, however, you can see obviously this information is in the clear. And because Talend's solution of Data Fabric can leverage all the policies being maintained in the underlying catalog, we can in fact automate the provisioning of non-production data across non-production environments and do that automatically based on the policies that are defined. But with all of our production data, we also need to support various mechanisms for supporting regulatory compliance and regulatory requirements. And one of those is clearly, the ability to support access rights, tell me what you know about me within the system and exactly all the private data you hold on me, and things like the right to be forgotten. So just to illustrate how this could be implemented, we've just got some processes linked to our production data here that if I click on them, we can see the effect of how those policies are enacted behind the scenes. So, for example, for this particular record here, Jean-Michel Franco, if I click on the access request, I'll just bring this down here. On the access request, what's happening behind the scenes here is a provisioning request has gone off, to the underlying privacy platform to go research and understand the relationships we have with Jean-Michel Franco's personal data, where it resides in the catalog and the platform, and bring me back a complete view across all of our systems where that private data may be held. So here you can see what the system's returned from that access query. Here we can see the various attributes that are covered by privacy policy associated with our concept of contact or customer. We can see that the MS SQL resource has these particular attributes, associated with Jean-Michel Franco. Similarly with the Snowflake, core data lake and data warehouse, and also in terms of the information we're ingested directly from Salesforce. So using this relationship analysis and using this semantic relationship between technical metadata and business terms, we're able to leverage the platform to manage things like access requests and give a complete view of how we're holding data about data about individuals and the personal information we're holding about them as a complete automated service. Clearly, one of the other requirements around GDPR and other regulatory requirements is the right to be forgotten, the ability to request all of our private information to be erased or masked, from all known systems. So again, enacting that process here, if I click on forget for Jean-Michel Franco, what we're going to do here is leverage that understanding of where all of our related personal data for Jean-Michel Franco resides, look at the policies for encryption or indeed privacy that we have in place for all those personal attributes, and go ahead and effectively mark them for privatization or privacy, so that effectively Jean-Michel Franco's details, all of his personal details, will get removed from our system as a result of this service executing. Now, we won't necessarily remove the individual at this point because there's a period by which they might revoke that right to be forgotten, but certainly for this period, we will employ the appropriate policy to forget this individual and all of their personal data. And here we can see the response from the system showing us where exactly that particular information about that resource is found. And hopefully, if I just refresh our view of production data, what we can now see is the row for this particular individual has now been masked or privatized. So we can no longer tell who this individual is by automatically putting in place the privacy policies for this individual. Okay, so all of the personal information associated with this individual is now masked or privatized across all of our systems automatically. And similarly, I might revoke that right to be forgotten and invoke the revoke mechanism on this particular individual, and therefore ask that we go and reverse that procedure. So again, whether we're storing seeds or encryption keys in external repositories or vaults, or using some of the intrinsic facilities within the solution, we can manage all of the security aspects around how that encryption and decryption or policy is taking place. So again, we can see here, this is how the system returned the information around the information we understand that is of private nature for this particular individual. And again, if I now refresh my production infrastructure, you can see now we've resurrected or de-encrypted, de-anonymized the details of Jean-Michel Franco because we've revoked his right to be forgotten. The maintainability of privacy policy is key and should be easy to administer, however. So if we just go back to the data catalog here and perhaps look at implementing a new privacy policy for one of our business terms. So sorry, let me just log back in here. So if we look at our address term here, we have a definition of what an address means to us in the business, and indeed we could do our semantic flow to see where address is being used. But if I want to change or enact a change in the policy by which addressing is classified as PII and therefore reverting to policy associated with it, it's a simple case of adding my new policy from the drop-down selection here. I might, in this particular case, choose a very simple anonymization or privacy policy to replace all of the letters. But as soon as I apply that policy, excuse me, the system now is automatically updating itself to say whenever I see anything to do with address information that we are semantically detecting in data, then I'm going to apply this anonymization policy to that information. So if I now go back to our production portal and maybe do, an access request on Jean-Michel Franco once more, what we should see is that the list of information that we deem private associated with Jean-Michel Franco is now also including the concept of the address element that we've just administered the change in the underlying privacy engine or catalog, and now is being applied automatically to all of the processes that leverage this information to determine what the privacy policy is for this particular attribute as the data is either accessed or moved around our data processing platform. So now we can see the information returned back on that access request. And what we should be able to see in here are new elements that we've identified as part of that privacy policy. Address elements both in Snowflake and in MS SQL have now been identified as attributes of interest from a privacy point of view. And here you can see the policy that we applied to that particular attribute being applied. So now the system understands that that is a private attribute and therefore will apply that privacy policy when right to be forgotten or access requests are administered throughout the platform. Okay, so let's change persona slightly here and move to the persona of a data consumer who might be an analyst, a report analyst, or indeed a scientist for that matter, engaging with the platform. It's really important that there's a balance of control and autonomy here to provide people with the right access to the right data based on their privileges or on the policy for provisioning data to them. So as a data consumer, I might, connect into the Talend data catalog, and maybe it's we're aware that clearly we're ingesting some information from Salesforce into our data lake architecture, and it might be that I want to do some reporting or analytics on the raw information that's coming from Salesforce as part of a particular task or research that I want to apply. So the data consumer can log into the catalog, can look at the enterprise architecture that the catalog is automatically building for us based on its understanding of relationships between data flows and lineage. We know that the data's in our Snowflake data platform somewhere. So if we just drill into the schemas that we know, suddenly we can see some of the tables that are contained within that platform. And the one ending here in SFDC may well be an item of interest for us. Let's just take a look. So I can click onto that particular asset within the catalog. This, as it says, is a table from Snowflake and the public schema in Snowflake, so we know its location in the overall estate. We can also look at things like the technical definition and the metadata associated with it. We can see that this is a fairly wide definition of around 62 columns. And it might be that I want to try and get access to this data, but because of my current rights, I don't have access to a sample or indeed the data within the catalog itself. So if I go back to my overview, we can see here we have the right to request access to or open this particular data set within the Talend platform. So let me just click on the opportunity to open this data set and see if I have access to it. Here you can see clicking on the request to open the dataset says we're not currently allowed access to the dataset. The policy does not allow me to access this particular resource. Do I want to send an access request that will go through a governance process to allow that access? Yes, please. So behind the scenes, what we've now enacted is an access request that goes through a governance process that again is managed by the overall Talend Fabric platform. Let me just log in to Talend Cloud and access the stewardship task that has been created as a result of this access request. So I'm logging into Talend Data Stewardship, where I'm, as a steward, have access to various campaigns. The campaign I'm interested in is this assigned dataset access campaign, where I can see that there is one item on an unassigned queue. So those access requests can go to a central queue or to individuals. Let me just have a look at the unassigned queue here and pick up this particular activity and put it onto my queue. Going back onto my queue now, what I see is that there is an access request to an underlying RDBMS table ending in contact SFDC, as we saw, and I make the decision here about whether to grant or revoke access to this particular resource based on policy or insights associated with who this individual is and the reason why they might be needing access to this data. It might be in this case, we're going to grant access and return my decision back to the overall workflow engine. In this particular example, we've got a 4 eyes approval stage. This may go on to a separate subject matter expert for another level of approval. I'm just going to pretend to be a different person here and effectively now approve that grant access right that may have been escalated to somebody else. But here I'm logged in as the same person but giving the same concept. I'm going to accept that grant request. And now behind the scenes, the system is updating its access rights. It's now understanding that me as a user has been granted the access rights to access this particular resource. So now if I go back in to the Talend Data Catalog, looking at our contact SFDC table, hopefully we'll have been updated and understand that our access rights have now been granted and we can actually get to this, this particular asset. So let me just try that out. So here you can see being requested to log in to the Talend platform, and I'm being redirected directly to this particular resource within the Talend platform. Provisioning of this resource into what we call the Talend data inventory is giving me access to the underlying data and giving me some indications of the qualitative aspects of this data as well. As you can see along the top here, this particular asset is being sampled for various data quality capabilities, showing me indications of invalid values, empty values, and compliant values in the data set. At the same time as being able to see the data, I have visual cues as to where there may be issues in this data in terms of compliance with schema or indeed the semantic type which we've automatically determined about this data. Either way, as a reporter, as a scientist, or an analyst, I now have access to a set of data within a governed regime, within the governance of the Talend data inventory, where I might now be able to go off and do some of my own work using this data as a starting point. I might start to build a data pipeline, excuse me, ingesting this data, or I might build a data preparation to start doing some pre-wrangling of this data and create another outcome that I might want to manage for my own purposes. The point here is that we've been through a totally governed and managed process to request access to this resource and now be presented with access to the data in a safe and governed environment that I can now start to use it for my own requirements. So let's recap where we left off and recap the demonstration elements. First up, we saw within the realm of Janet, the ability to automate the data inventory, the ability to ingest and harvest technical metadata from across our data assets in the estate, but also the ability to define business terminology, classify that business terminology, and manage the semantic relationships between business terminology and technical metadata to reveal the secrets between how the business sees data and the classification of that data in all of our technical and data assets. Secondly, we saw how the definition of those policies and the understanding of those relationships of personal data help us automate some of the standard compliance routines like encryption or anonymization of data outside of production environments, like the right to be forgotten, like subject access rights, etc. And so by having this common underpinning of understanding of relationships and policy, we're able to automate and enact a whole bunch of compliance activities and processes. We're also able to accelerate the concept and maintain the concept of data privacy across the platform. So the idea here is that when we are able to introduce a new privacy policy, for example, we had around the address attribute, and have that maintained by non-technical people, have somebody like in the office of the DPO or the CDO to manage our policies for privacy and apply them in a central place, but have all of the processes update themselves about what that new policy represents. And finally, we looked at how we could then use the outcomes of these governance processes and privacy processes to help democratize data access. You saw how we requested access to the data set of interest from the catalog, how we went through a managed governance process to grant or revoke access to that particular resource, and ultimately delivered a user experience for provisioning of that data resource to that individual so that they can start now enacting and working with that data to provide an output for their own needs. So just to wrap up on the demonstration then, we looked at several challenges that Acme had and the goals and the pains that they had to overcome as part of this data privacy platform. Hopefully you've seen how with the Talend data privacy solution, we can change those pains into gains where we provide a solution that provides centralized control of privacy policy and management. How we can drive operational automation through the ability to use all of those policies programmatically in all of our processes, and how we can help drive business accountability by delegating anonymization or privacy rules to those that know that better than people in IT, and do all of this in an autonomous and a systematic way. So, Talend has many successful customers that have benefited from our approach to data governance and privacy, helping them deliver effective, trusted solutions within their organization. Accor is a world leader in hospitality, offering guests a unique experience in 5,000 Accor hotels and residents located in 110 countries. Accor has reshaped its core business around the idea of augmented hospitality. Its services go beyond the traditional hotel model by using data to anticipate every customer need while respecting the privacy of guests' personal data. Through balancing and respecting the intimacy of guest data through collaborative data governance, Accor have successfully implemented this hyper-personalization service, which has immediately resulted in a 12% increase in satisfaction of its elite customers. Accor choose Data Fabric to collect, process, and categorize huge volumes of data at the same time, establish trust and proper governance concerning its use. All of this information is stored in the data lake on AWS and processed through to Snowflake Data Warehouse using Talend. Thanks to Talend's solution, Accor was then able to achieve the goals and the benefits that you can see listed here. I'm just going to wrap up here with a very quick summary of the Talend overall platform. Most organizations are looking to obviously dramatically reduce cost and risk as a baseline requirement. But what's stopping them doing that is typically a chaotic data world on the left-hand side that you see here. The basis of the Talend Data Fabric platform is to provide a series of capabilities around collecting and connecting to information, governing that data through its journey from source to consumption, driving compute and transformation of that data to reshape or prioritize the way in which the data is presented for consumption, and finally managing the sharing of that data in a reliable and secure way to ensure consumers can connect to data of interest. If we get that right, we can help organizations dramatically reduce their cost and risk of managing data, but hopefully also unravel some other opportunities around monetization of data, driving faster innovation, or indeed improving the customer experience. So with that, I think I'm handing back to Andy or Onkar.
Yes, thanks a lot, Darren. I particularly enjoyed the demo, which showed the real-life view of how various aspects of data governance, like cataloging, business glossary, and data protection, can be brought to practice, and even more so from the perspective of different personas in an organization. Talend is an advanced level partner in our ecosystem of technology partners with data and analytics competency credibility. Talend solutions are integrated with over 70 plus AWS services, including AWS Redshift, S3, EMR, Aurora, and AWS Outposts, which makes it ideal for scenarios requiring low latency access to on-premise systems, local data processing, data residency, and migration of applications with local system interdependencies. Our combined solution is being used by a large number of customers globally, including the likes of Accor Hotels, which Darren just talked about, and for a variety of use cases, including data modernization and building secure data platforms on AWS Cloud for driving business outcomes such as delivering superior customer experience. Talend has multiple solutions available on the AWS Marketplace, which makes it really easy for customers to procure and deploy the Talend solution using a single-click deployment based on AWS CloudFormation templates. I'll now hand it over back to Darren to talk about how you can start using the solution right away.
Okay, thanks, Onkar. So how can we help you get started on your privacy journey today? Two calls to action maybe here. One is to essentially download and connect with our definitive guide to data governance. The three-step process that I outlined a little earlier is documented in much more detail in this guide. It helps you understand some of the challenges, some of the opportunities that good data governance and privacy policy will enable you to embrace. So a recommended read with a good cup of coffee at some point during your journey.